Welcome to another episode of Creative Cooking. Today we're making white pizza, and we'll start with the dough. Here we have just over 2 teaspoons or 1 packet of active dry yeast, and we have some warm tap water. I happen to have spring water here, so it works out really well. And we're also going to add some honey, and that's about a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half. And what you'll want to do here is just give it a nice mix, and to dissolve the coating that's on the yeast. It's used to protect the yeast, keep it from sticking together. Once it's stirred and the sugars are dissolved, in this case it's honey, the yeast will have the opportunity to proof. We'll just let it sit for about 10 minutes, after which time it'll look something like this. It looks like beer. Now that that's done, we'll go ahead and we'll add some salt, some of the flour, and don't worry, I have all of the ingredients in the description below. You'll want this to knead for about 6 minutes. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do it by hand. But I do recommend that you get one of these stand mixers someday at least, because if you intend to do a lot of baking, it can save you a lot of work. Now once the dough is completed, we'll go ahead and add some oil to a bowl. That's to keep everything nice and non-stick for our dough, but it'll also help to prevent the dough from drying out while it's rising. Cover it with a towel and allow that to rise for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the temperature in your house. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our sauce. In this case, it's a white sauce, also known as a bechamel. So we'll start off by making a roux. And again, I like to use just slightly more fat than flour when I make it. I find that it's much easier to work with. The standard ratio is 1:1. But I prefer doing it this way. And after about 2 minutes, go ahead and add cold milk from the refrigerator. Add it all at once and keep stirring. You will not have lumps. You'll want to keep some milk handy, because as you cook it, you want to keep an eye on how thick it is, and bearing in mind that it will thicken as it cools. So if it seems a little too thick, just add a little more milk, whisk it in until it looks about right, and then set it aside. And now for the cheeses. What we have here is some provolone. It's the same stuff you use for sandwiches. Just ask the person behind the meat counter to lop off about 1.5 inches. And this is sharp provolone. It's a very intensely sharp provolone. And we'll be using both. And here we have pepper rings. These are pickled peppers. They're the Italian peppers or the banana peppers, of that variety, okay? And they're not bright green. They're more like a lime green, like a yellowish green. And they're very, very tasty. And a good shout out to Mary DiMeglio, who actually shared this recipe many, many years ago. I put my own little twist on it, but it's essentially the same recipe. So thank you, Mary. And we're going to go ahead and shred our own cheese. First of all, I don't think you can buy shredded provolone, so you have to buy a chunk of provolone and shred it yourself. And once you get used to doing that, you'll never buy pre-shredded cheese again. And here we have the sharp stuff, okay? And I want to show you the difference. Because the sharp cheese has been aged longer, it does not have as much moisture, and you'll notice that after you shred it, it'll actually start to break up in your hands. And that's how you know you have a nice sharp cheese. Next, we'll put a generous amount of olive oil to line what you would call a 1/2 sheet pan. I've had this pan for years. It's nice and dark and black and beautiful, and I will never throw this pan away. Never. And then we'll put our dough. Look at that. You could have made a loaf of bread out of that, but this isn't a bread recipe, it's a pizza dough recipe. So, in fact, it's the Wolfgang Puck pizza dough recipe, if you must know. And we're going to spread it out. Now, here's the thing about spreading out dough. It's going to want to stretch back towards the center. The trick is to stretch and then allow it to rest, then stretch again, and then allow it to rest. You'll have to do this 3 or 4 times, but eventually you'll be able to push it out to all the corners and completely cover the bottom of the pan. You might want to cover that and let it sit for, 15 minutes, let it rise again. And when that's done, we're ready to top the pizza. We'll start off with the bechamel, and the best way to do this is to just take spoonfuls and kind of in dollops all around the dough. And then using a pastry brush, you just spread it around, because you don't want to put too much pressure on the dough. You don't want to deflate it. The next layer will be the sharp provolone, the sharp stuff. We want that to be the first layer. That way there it'll melt into that bechamel sauce, come out nice and creamy and delicious. Absolutely. And then the next layer will be the regular provolone cheese, which has excellent melting properties, by the way. Now the peppers have been rinsed and drained just to get the excess brine off of them, and we'll just go ahead and start putting them on top of the pizza. Now, if you have any of this Italian seasoning laying around, you can sprinkle some of that on top. Generally, when you do something like this, you just hold it very high over the pan so it just kind of falls like snowflakes. And then we'll finish with some more extra virgin olive oil. You want to create a thin stream of it and just kind of go over the whole pizza, make sure it's well coated. That will assist with the melting of the cheese and season the pizza as well. Now we're ready to bake the pizza, and we want to put that on the bottom oven rack for the first 5 minutes of baking. And this will give the pizza dough a head start. We want to get that started before we move it to the center rack. And then we'll bake it for another 15 minutes. So at 15 minutes, after you move it to the center oven rack, you'll want to check it to make sure it's not burned and to make sure that the bottom crust is done. Now that the pizza's cooled down a bit, we'll take it out of the pan. And that comes out very easily, as you can see. You just slip a spatula underneath and it just slides right off. Straight onto the cutting board, And then you can cut this into whatever size pieces you like. And here's how it comes out. Not too thin, not too thick, just perfect for that bakery style pizza. If you've ever bought that before, you can get it red, you can get it white. It's about that thickness. That's the way you want it. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to join us each week for more great videos made for people who like to cook. Until then, bon appetit.